All right, so there's a client who is in a high-rise building in downtown Chicago. And the client has a situation where they have a door that leads, they say, an exit door from the building to the garage. So that's certainly going to be, a stair tower with a door that leads into the garage space, the underground or above ground garage, whatever, very likely underground, or some common area of the building that leads into the garage. Very typical. And what the client's problem is the door doesn't latch at all. The door goes to close and just floats there and never really gets closed or latched. It's most certainly a fire door, so it's a problem. It's a major problem. And what's interesting, near the end, I will add more to why it's a problem and whether or not the approach that ownership wants to take is really the right approach. This is a result of the amount of pressure that's being involved, that is going through that opening and in the two different spaces, exacerbated by large exhaust fans that are in the garage space. So they are sucking air out, forcing it through every single opening that it can. So the question becomes what are the solutions? Well, we're going to discover in a moment the obvious solution, which is not obvious to the client at this point. Another idea, and fixing that obvious solution, that obvious problem is likely the solution. However, you could also consider adding a fire-rated louver to the opening. A door shop that's listed and approved for doing such work could do it, and what you're going to be providing is obviously the movement of air through that door so the door can still close. That would be a reasonable solution. Assuming that the door is permissible to have a fire-rated louver installed into it, that could solve the problem because you've got a source of fresh air. So the door should still be able to close because the air is still able to come, rather than this, the air is still able to come through the door. That would be a solution. Another solution that I suggested to the client, which is a massive band-aid, is Cal Royal has a female linkage that goes between the spindles of two door closers, which I'll show you in a moment. Imagine in your mind's eye installing a parallel arm door closer. Well, a parallel arm closer is the least efficient way to install a closer, and it's because when the door goes from 0 to 90 degrees, the amount of rotation of the spindle itself is noticeably less than the amount of rotation of the spindle when the door is mounted in a regular arm mount, pull side of the door. So he's got a parallel arm mount installation, and he's got it, which is a hobbling effect on the efficiency of the door closer getting the door closed. So that's not good at all. So imagine a closer mounted in a parallel arm fashion. Imagine a second closer body only mounted directly below it where the two spindles have been connected by this linkage. So you're substantially increasing the amount of closing force. However, what's of most concern is the amount of opening force. When you increase the amount of closing force, you increase the amount of opening force as well. So that's probably not a solution in the sense that you still need someone to be able to push that door open when the exhaust fans aren't on. And I had a client many years ago, Gold Coast of Chicago, which is the John Hancock building going north. The Windy City, that's for a different reason, but it is windy on the lakefront. Any lakefront can get windy. This one client, he was telling me about how he solved, the really windy Lake Michigan environmental situation. He's like, I installed a closer on the parallel arm, and I installed the same closer on the pull side. So he had a parallel arm and a regular arm. So he had two door closers on that opening, that exterior opening. Same concept. The amount of opening force is obviously going to be reduced when those fans are on. You still need a way to get that door closed. And the idea there is because those spring rates are adjustable, you can pre-compress those. It's something to consider. It's something that's been done, and it's something to keep in mind. So we've got the solution I'm about to show you. We've got the add a louver to it, because that might solve it once you fix the first problem. And if fixing the first problem doesn't solve it, add the two door closers. So the client says he's working in maintenance in a high-rise building in Chicago, watched many YouTube videos, learned many things. Exit doors from the building to the garage, as you will see in the short video I made, which we're about to look at, because of the temperature difference which, you know, he just, there's a temperature difference certainly because one's an unheated garage, but it's not the temperature, of course. It's the stack pressure that's in there from the garage and the building. He means the common area of the building, not, you know, the side of the wall opposite the garage, and the large exhaust fans that run in the garage. There is a strong draft, so the doors either don't close or it slams. It slams because he's got it set so high to counteract the exhaust fans when they're running. He's installed 2 different door closers. Well, that's a tip that there's a bigger problem, and that those were heavy duty that he installed, but still can't make the doors close and don't slam. I would really appreciate if you could help me in this regard. Let's switch to the screen view and let's look at the video that the client has provided us. If you've not hit subscribe yet, we would very much appreciate if you did, and hopefully you're enjoying this video. Now, let's get back to it. Okay, so here's the video. Let's take a look. What he's showing us back here are where those exhaust fans are. So a couple of things, just because we're looking at it. There's a knob there. All right, we've gone through that door apparently to another door. Okay. There's a lever. Most absolutely a fire door. Push the door open. So the first thing I'd like to say is, obviously they added this rectangular plate to the door. That's an aftermarket add. And I'm going to imagine that the lock prep on this, there we go, absolutely. So these plates are added. He's got a conversion filler from mortise to cylindrical lock, and these plates were added because there were function holes. And when this building was built, and I'm gonna wonder, high-rise building downtown Chicago, late 60s, early 70s. That could be an Aero mortise lock that's there. What I'm driving at though is this technically violates the integrity of the fire rating of the opening by adding these additional plates. And the reason is because these plates represent an additional fuel load, which the door's not been tested for. So, regardless, that's not why we're here. So the door either, he's got access control here, obviously. I don't know if that's an electric strike that's there. And that access control is for something. So, something's electrified in here, would be my guess. Then, of course, the exhaust fans that they show us down over here. So, the initial problem, and it may not be an epic problem, but the initial problem that has to get resolved before anything is done... you know what? It's not in the video. The evidence is in the images. So the client, I'm seeing this closer here. I don't know. This is just a closer purchased from the local big box store, would be my guess. Doesn't mean anything, but this is what's unusual. So the installation is incorrect to begin with. So this arm, in a parallel arm fashion, must be mounted parallel to the face of the door. So in this case, obviously you've got to fix the installation first, per the installation instructions. And installation instructions will look not unlike what we have here. Parallel arm installation. Actually, let's take a look here. Yeah, parallel arm, basically. So, that what's called the main arm, it needs to be mounted parallel. This is the main arm. It needs to be mounted parallel to the face of the door. And the client does not have that. The orientation looks correct, with it going away from the hinge side. But I would resolve that problem first. I would also determine whether or not this opening is handicap compliant. Fire safety code is always going to trump handicap compliance. If it's not handicap compliant, and it may not be, I would then install a closer, not a adjustable closer like what they have here. Universal hardware, that tells me that this is adjustable, all in one, that it has a spring rate that you can adjust. Well, I wouldn't use that. I have customers that I sell routinely a Norton 1605. It's a fixed size 5 spring, and the reason they do it is because it gets the door closed, whereas the adjustable ones that are 1 through 6 don't get the door closed. So I would consider a fixed spring. I wouldn't be using this universal all-in-one situation. I would first test this. I would first correct this. I would then increase the spring rate to its maximum according to the installation instructions. And they are certainly going to be in the installation instructions somewhere. So, yeah, maximum door size. This tells you how many rotations are permissible. So I would be rotating the closer a number of times, or rotating the set screw a number of times to increase that tension, the preset tension that's already on the spring. I would see if that would resolve it. And the reason I'm taking this very basic academic approach is because someone who's installed it wrong may need to know the fundamentals. So correct this first, increase that spring rate to a substantial amount. That would be what I would suggest doing first to begin with. The second option was, as I had mentioned, would be to add a fire-rated louver. That may or may not be an option for somebody. They make louvers with fusible links. It may or may not be permissible, but it will allow airflow through there. The issue, though, is if you recall from his video, there were 2 doors that were involved. So that source of fresh air has got to go through 2 openings. So that may be less of a solution. Then the solution was those 2 stacked closers. Let's take a look at those. And here is the cut sheet for that concept. You can see here what they're doing. Oh, you know what? Let's back up. What the client should do is get that door closer installed on the opposite side of the door, because the regular arm mount is going to be noticeably more efficient. I would remove the closer, and hopefully he still has the shoe that goes on the end of the forearm, and I would install it on the pull side of the opening. That's what I would try first. That is going to be a far more efficient way to get that closer operating correctly, is the bottom line. So I would absolutely try that. So here's that 2 stacked closer option that I had mentioned earlier. This is possibly not practical, but if it's not handicap compliant, maybe this is something to consider. It's not inexpensive, this approach, because of the fact that you're buying 2 closers, the linkage, you're buying the massive mounting plate that gets attached to the door first. You've got to have this big piece of steel there because you've got a lot of, it's very likely you're going to deflect the face of the steel and break the face of the door away from its core when you've got that much static pressure in compressed springs in a very small area on the door itself, and you're pulling the whole door open. You might try to pull that door open and take the door skin away with you and break that from the core. If you weren't mounting it to a greater surface area of that plate. So you might want to consider that. They do talk about how to rotate the spring tension. That's here. Interior doors up to 60 inch. Yeah, so this is going to be substantially more massive when you're dealing with what you might be able to get closed. They also mention how much heavier of a door 2 of these closers can handle. They're not making that value up. It's obviously coming from some testing that Cal Royal has done. And really the important part of that is that linkage that goes between the 2 spindles here, and you can see it mentioned here. All right, now I had also mentioned to the client a response about a follow-up that I had received. So let's wrap up this video with that follow-up. If you are enjoying this video, please click thumbs up or like, and also please consider subscribing to our channel. Let's move on to the rest of the video. And before we wrap that up, a lot of these questions that I get are just people looking for information, and a lot of the time it's not going to turn into a sale. So the amount of tech support that you provide on material that they bought elsewhere is a determination that you yourself need to make. I personally don't provide tech support on material that I didn't supply because, not that I am a curmudgeon, I just don't have 100 hours in a day. So I sent the cost to the client for that 2-stack closer, and it was $550. 2 closers, big plate, linkage, the whole 9 yards. It's expensive is the bottom line. The client has a life safety problem. The client has a code violation, life safety problem. Hi, Mr. Howard. I spoke with my supervisor, and he can't buy outside of the company account that we have at this time. I don't really know what that means. Either we buy it from these people, and that's who we buy it from, or we don't have the money, whatever it is. Well, as I had predicted, it's likely not going to turn into a sale. My response to that is, with that condo building collapsing in Surfside, Miami a year ago or so, the engineer who inspected the water damage has a paper trail where they said the damage is critical, and I don't know that the words were failure is imminent, but something to that effect. So when I get asked about something that turns out to be a code violation that absolutely is a threat to life, I put it in, I put it in writing, that the budgetary concerns, the path by which you purchase hardware has nothing to do with a life safety code violation. That needs to be mitigated first, regardless of how you solve the problem. But I say, you have a code violation, you have a fire safety violation. If the fire marshal comes and does an inspection on your building, which they will sooner or later, that's a violation. Now it's in writing that it's a violation, meaning I have acknowledged it, I've been brought into the conversation, and I've said you have a fire safety violation that needs to be resolved immediately. And that's just where that is. So hopefully this conversation is of some benefit. If I was going to do anything, I would get that closer installed on the regular arm side and then increase the spring rate up all the way up to its maximum, whatever that closer can do. And then I would judge from there if it solved the problem. Adding a louver to it, yeah, I mean, it's logical that if you're allowing air to pass through it at all times, the door will have less resistance to air trying to pass through the opening at all times. But again, it looked like he had at least 2 doors there. So that might need to be considered as well. Those 2 things could solve it. Adding a second door closer, it seems like he has 2 door closers. He might just add a second one to the outside after he gets the first one installed. But all of this is premised on the fact that the opening isn't ADA compliant. But NFPA 80, National Fire Protection Standard for fire openings and other protectives, trumps handicap compliance. So getting that door to close and latch is job 1. He doesn't have a fire door to begin with because of that added hardware that's been attached. That's between him and the inspector. But from my role, my position as a fire door inspector, letting you know that that does violate the situation that you have there. All those extra holes that are drilled in the door, those all have to be filled with like material, like run bolts through those. That would be acceptable according to the guidelines in NFPA 80. And we'll see if the client gets his problem resolved. And we'll go from there. Thank you for watching this video. Thank you for watching, and if you've enjoyed this video, please click thumbs up, please subscribe, and maybe even send the video to someone that you know. Thank you.